It is always the challenge of the preacher to sort of figure out how to get started with a sermon. And sometimes I know you think, well, once we get started, we never stop. So it's always a challenge also of how to stop at the right place. And so where do we even begin this morning in our search for God in the sky? After listening to those texts and hearing the kids talk about it, we've done God in the dirt. We've done God in each of us. We've done search for God in the water. So now how do we get into this idea that God is in the sky, necessarily, and only up in the heavens? We could consider the image, as I suggested to the kids. They already were easily got a hold of that. The image of the athlete, after scoring a goal or a touchdown, kneeling down, looking up in the sky and crossing themselves. You know, a Tim Tebow kind of look. And it was like bear. I didn't know that. I forgot about this one, you know. It's not quite crossing yourself, but that's cool. Or we could consider the fictional story I read recently by the mystery author David Baldacci, titled One Summer. It's not really a mystery book at all. It's a good read, in which twin sisters, Lizzie and Lily, live on the coast of South Carolina, on a rugged coast in a big house that has a lighthouse on it. And at age 5, Sister Lily gets leukemia and ultimately dies the following year. And when Lizzie asks her parents, "Where is Lily?" they say, "She's in heaven." Well, Lizzie, at 6 years old in this story, manages to turn the lighthouse, big light searchlight, on manual and starts to search for where Lizzie is in the heavens. If God is in the sky, then where exactly is God? Lizzie becomes obsessed with switching this giant light, into manual mode so she could find her beloved little twin sister. Or you might try to get your heads around my experience nearly 34 years ago in Santa Fe, New Mexico. If you've been to New Mexico and Santa Fe, you know what the sky is like there. It is an unbelievable blue. It is an unbelievable light show sometimes at night. Well, I was at a very bad place in my life, if you've heard me refer to before, and I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long, long time, the need to pray. It had been a long time, and I just didn't even know where to start, quite frankly. And I walked out one night into that awesome sky, searching for something to help, and I saw a particular star that grabbed my attention, and I said to thee, "That's where my grandmother Carrie is." She was always so connected and so close to God. Maybe she was there. And that was my entree into praying again in my life and trying to get closer somehow to God. I could get closer to my grandmother Carrie and I would be there. Now that's just sort of how it was. Or, we might consider what Christina read this morning in the introduction to the Psalter of Psalm 115 about this question of where's God? The question appears frequently in the Psalms, or fairly often. In our reading up for this morning, did you hear the psalmist answer the question by saying, "Our God is in the heavens"? Indeed, God is in the heaven. God inhabits the sky. Diana Butler Bass, in this book called Grounded, says it is an ancient and universal answer. So ancient and so universal that we do not know when human beings first articulated it. And given Bass's purpose in this book of sort of rebutting this ancient belief that God is up there, we're here, and hell is down there, that God is a flattened God for us. That it's interesting that she says something about this at all, but then she says, it may well be the first answer that most people know in their own lives, learned in Sunday school, or taught by parents, or heard on the wind, she says. And did you hear what she says, Diana Butler Bassett, in our continuing text? Let me just repeat it. The psalmist's words, our God is in the heaven, actually unveil far more complex spiritual possibilities for us. Unlike the ground and the water, the sky is beyond our comprehension. Every night of my life, unless something is really wrong, I go out on my front porch, and we live high up on a hill looking here toward you to the east, and about 10 o'clock or sometime, I just look at the sky. I search for the planes that are going into BWI or taking off. I see them. I search for the stars, and then if I see a constellation that I like, I call Pat out to tell me what it is. But there's something that just draws me to it. But I don't understand it. It's incomprehensible in some ways. Diana Butler Bass says that where does it begin or where does it end? How large is it? Is it both visible as the location of heavenly orbs and clouds and the colored light, and invisible as atmosphere and wind? It was a pretty active sky last night. It is a vast cosmos and big skies. It is sunlight warming our face, our wind blowing our hair. It is where we always are, what we always breathe, yet at the same time it is a place we can never go, I love this, without oxygen and special suits and flying machines. Haven't we marveled at the amazing photos of the Earth from those flying machines in outer space, from the space station? Butler Bass says further that the sky is the most intimate, listen to this, the most intimate inner space and the most incomprehensible outer reaches of the universe. The most intimate space and the most incomprehensible outer reaches of the universe. You might be thinking like I am, isn't God like that? Back in 2009, Pat and I were on a 2-week tour of Morocco. And for part of the trip, we spent 3 nights in the Sahara Desert. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in the desert or not, but it is beyond immense. We were on a tour group, and we were sleeping in a tent. It wasn't elaborate, but it was comfortable, with a small lantern and candles for light. And I was amazed. I have claustrophobia really, really badly. And I was claustrophobic in all of that unbelievable, incomprehensible space. Got really kind of unnerved and weirded out a little bit the first night we went to bed. Kept the candle burning as much as I could all night. But not only was the terrain immense, the sky was beyond immense. Just as Diana Butler Bass says, the most intimate space and the most incomprehensible outer reaches of the universe, in all of that sand, and all of that sky. Or we might consider, I'm still trying to figure out how to get into this, or we might consider the question asked by the New York Times columnist and author Thomas Friedman, is God in cyberspace? Yes. Now, I know I'm on a little bit of a shaky ground because I'm not sure cyberspace and the sky are all the same, but it seems like that's where cyberspace is for me. I just finished reading Friedman's latest book, which I've referenced a couple times before in the sermon, the book titled, Thank You for Being Late. Somebody showed up late for a breakfast one morning, and he said, no, thank you for being late. I had time to just sit and chill and think for a little bit. But the subtitle is more revealing of the theme of the book, and its subtitle is An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Acceleration. It's all about how we are adjusting to the amazingly rapid acceleration of both the capacity and the speed of technological developments in the past 50 years, but especially since 2007. And what happened in 2007? in technology. It was the unveiling of the iPhone. And all of the accelerated development that has occurred since 2007. It is amazing. That was a Jeopardy question this past week. I got it right.
It was the iPad, not iPhone.
It was the iPhone. And then the iPad was in the midst of that. The iPad was first? Okay, well.
That was the Jeopardy question. That
was a Jeopardy question, too. Whatever. I only know a little bit about what I'm talking about. So, in the next to the last chapter in this book, Friedman discusses what he says is the most interesting question he has ever been asked in 25 years of book signings and Q&A sessions. Is God in cyberspace? He said, I confess I did not know how to answer this question, which was asked in the utmost sincerity and demanded an answer. Then he says, after all, we have created a vast new realm of human interaction. If the supernova, his word for all that is cyberspace and more, he said, is somewhere between heaven and earth, who is in charge there? Amazon or God on high? Yes. And after a rather pregnant pause, Friedman says this question seized him, but he couldn't answer the question. So he called on one of his most cherished mentors, Rabbi Tazivi Marks, a great Talmudic scholar he had met at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, a wonderful place of study. Friedman says that Rabbi Mark's answer was so good that he put it into one of his earlier books, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, which was about the Middle East. Friedman continued to ask religious leaders this question, he says, is God in cyberspace? When he asked the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, the Archbishop joked at first that God must be in cyberspace, because every time that he's in the London subway, I hear people saying into their cell phones, oh God, why doesn't this work? But alas, here is how Rabbi Marks responded to Friedman's original question. Now just stay with me here. The rabbi said that Tom should start by responding, that depends on what your view of God is. The rabbi continues that if your view of God is that God is literally the Almighty and makes his presence felt through divine intervention by smiting evil and rewarding good, then God sure as hell isn't in cyberspace. And that was a quote. You know, I would never say that word. Which is full of pornography, gambling, blogs, and tweets trashing different people from every direction. And God might not be in the sky either, considering what's happening in much of the world in terms of smog and pollution. The rabbi then added this, in the biblical view of God, as we understand the Bible during the time of the creation of the Bible, he is always intervening. He punishes the bad and rewards the good. And that's his male pronoun for God, not mine. And then the rabbi says the post-biblical view of God, and I think this is a Jewish view, and one that we might resonate with, is that we make God present by our own choices and our own decisions. I suppose this suggests that God is in the dirt, in part at least because we put our hands in the dirt and we hold it dear and we care for it, and in caring for the soil, God is with us. Seems like the challenge in this sermon is that by the time I figured out how to get into it, we're done. And I don't know quite what to do with that. So then it becomes a challenge of how do I finish. But we must consider the text from John's Gospel, John 3:16. For the Christian world, this verse gets at the core of the deep sense of who Jesus is and how Jesus enters our world. And speaking of athletic events, how many times in the past, not so much recently in the last 5 years, have you seen a sign that says John 3:16 on it when you're at a game, right? I think I told you once that I made a very dear friend and colleague in one of my companies I worked for, who was Jewish, a sign with Deuteronomy 6:4 on it, and I gave it to him, and I said, the next time at home when you see that John 3:16 sign, you just hold this up. As I wrote in the introduction to this text this morning, this verse is not for me, not at least anymore. It's not a call to personal salvation. That's the meaning I grew up with, and maybe you did too, but it is not how I see it in the context of our search for God in the world. In the alternative reading of this verse, God so loved the universe that God entered the cosmos in the form of a gift, the gift of Jesus, that we might trust in this divine presence and experience abundance. Further, this is not a story about getting saved from hell, unless, as one writer puts it, unless that hell is the one we are making through our own destruction of the atmosphere. No, my friends, I see this verse in John's Gospel as central to the Christian way of saying that God dwells in the universe, the universe that we also inhabit, and that we might experience the life and the beauty of life in heaven here and now. What this means is that in Christian theology, Jesus brings together sky and earth, God who dwells with us and in us. It is good to remember that other religions say similar things, but in different ways. That God is closer than we can ever imagine. I love how Diana Butler Bass brings this section of her book grounded to a close with these words about finding God in the sky. She says, the sky is sacred. The sphere of dynamic forces and its mysterious emptiness. We cannot love something without seeing it, and it is hard to see the sky. Yet love it we must. For loving the atmosphere, knowing that it is God's abode and God's breath, will give us the courage to save it. And then she offers this challenge. If we fail to comprehend the sacredness of the sky, that the heavens are the spiritual currents of life in, how can we survive? And I'll offer you one more quote, going way back into the 18th century from Jonathan Edwards. When we behold the light and brightness of the sun, he said, the golden edges of an evening cloud, or the beauteous rainbow, we behold the adamblations. I never heard that word before. It means, or revelations of God's glory and God's goodness. And in the blue sky of God's mildness and God's gentleness. To be true to, and whether this is a good place to stop, I'm going to stop. To be true to our invocation offered at the beginning of worship, that we welcome people of all spiritual paths, and to be true to the idea that God is in each of us, not just us, this progressive group of Christians, but in each of us. To be true to that, then it might be true that Tim Tebow is really thanking God in the heavens after scoring a touchdown. That Lizzie was right to search for her little sister Liv with her searchlight off the coast of South Carolina. That I did indeed find God, or at least find some help in that star assigned to my grandmother in New Mexico sky. That by our own choices and actions and decisions, that we find God in cyberspace. And indeed, let it be true for you and for me today that we find the God of love, the God of healing in our lives and in the lives of all those we meet this day. Amen.